Hi, David.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
I'm good.
Nice to see you.
I'll see you again.
Yeah. Got a few people trickling into the waiting room.
We should have a few. This is a popular topic.
It sure is a popular topic. It just can be a bit tricky at 5 o'clock with people's work commitments.
Yeah. Queensland's 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Where I am. But I write books, so I can stop and start when I feel like it.
Okay, that sounds nice. I've had one of those days. I thought I was at one point going to miss this meeting because I was caught with them in the city, meeting with a couple of unions about things. So I've literally just sat down in the desk. So
Well done. Are you very close to tabling a motion for this?
Well, funny you should ask that. If you hold on for the presentation, I'll take you right through that, Peter.
Thank you very much. I will keep it going. And because it's much different from National Council. I was there online.
We have the project that we have. Just give me 1 sec, madam.
Yep.
You're a host. Great. Yeah, so no, we'll go through that. We'll go through the timeline. We'll say what's in front of Parliament. We'll explain. What the next steps in Parliament are. We'll hopefully get that covered in the first 25 minutes or so.
Right. Have you got a minute? I'll just tell an interesting story relating to this because I get medicinal cannabis delivered from Melbourne up to Canada.
Yeah.
If I don't insist upon them making it a sign for, they leave it at the front door. And I've contacted TGA, doctor, pharmacy, some other couple of branches in state people, I can't remember who they are. No one will take responsibility for it. And it worries me because we have kids up here who steal things from front doors all the time, the deliveries.
They're a very trusting group, Peter.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah. Is that like a monthly thing?
Yeah. So okay. I get it delivered a month.
So it's quite a chunk then, sitting there.
Yeah, I don't understand how it's legal to leave it.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't leave a bunch of alcohol at the front without getting someone to sign for it.
Yeah, that's not listed as a dangerous drug, but I think that's just as bad. In fact, I think
you have to get someone to sign for alcohol.
There we go.
Oh, you do? Okay, so you do. Yeah, I have to ask them to make it that way and pay extra. It's a bit of a strange system.
Yeah. Well, we might give this another minute and then we'll get started.
All right, I'll shut up.
Let me just. Okay, guys, nice to see you all here. I'm David Shoebridge, the Greens Justice Spokesperson in the Federal Parliament, and we've got this bill before the Federal Parliament to legalise cannabis. I'm sitting here in Gadigal land at Redfern in Sydney. We're all on First Nations land all across this country, so I think we want to collectively acknowledge that fact. And I think we should also acknowledge the fact that when we're talking about, in this case, cannabis law reform, we should acknowledge that historically, drug possession laws in particular, and cannabis possession laws especially, have been a tool used to police First Nations communities and often used by police as an excuse to get in front of First Nations peoples, to shake them down and search them, and to get into First Nations communities and aggressively police them. And well, yes, we're talking about cannabis law reform, but there's a significant degree of First Nations justice attached to this as well. And yet another reason to commit to the outcomes. So if it's okay with you, I will, I'll go through a presentation about making a submission, where the bill's up to, and at the end of that, hopefully we will have enough time for Q&A. If anyone's got questions specifically about what they want to put in a submission, any other questions about the campaign, there should be plenty of time to cover that at the end. So if it's all right with you, I will start a screen share. You need to let me share screen. You should. Okay, guys, can you all see that? So this presentation is about you're writing a submission to a parliamentary inquiry on legalising cannabis. How do we go about doing that? First of all, I thought I might just go through the timeline to date about what we've done to get to a position of getting the legislation in Parliament, because, you know, it doesn't just happen overnight. There's a bunch of stuff you need to get sorted before you get into Parliament. So September, October last year, we worked with lawyers and barristers to get some advice on, can the federal Parliament legalise cannabis for the whole country, or do we have to wait for each state and territory to move? We got some pretty compelling constitutional legal advice that yes, we absolutely can. There's a power in the federal Parliament to legalise cannabis for the whole country at one go. For the legal nerds amongst you, it hangs off the patents power, but that advice is pretty rock solid. Once we had that advice, we realised we could go ahead and draft a model, a legislative model. We started that work really November, December of last year, working up the drafting instructions so as we could get our first draft of the bill in shape. And then in January of this year, seems longer ago than that, but no, it was in January of this year, we got the Independent Parliamentary Budget Office, which is an office in the federal Parliament that is independent of all the different political parties there. And it's full of experts who cost policies. And they told us that in the first decade of legalising cannabis, there is $28 billion in public revenue in taxes from legalising cannabis. And good news is they told us that was in the context of a legal cannabis market halving the retail cost, the street price of cannabis in a legal market. So $28 billion in public revenue, and it's a cost of living measure as well. So that's pretty good. Then in February of this year, we pushed out our first draft of the bill to legalise cannabis. That's the bill is a draft law that hasn't been passed. We then worked out how best to talk to people about what that draft bill was. And in March of this year, we put the bill out for feedback, and we had a bunch of submissions in a bunch of events we hosted in April to encourage people to make submissions. We had online submissions come on board. And one of the extraordinary thing was we got about 9,000 submissions, online submissions to that draft piece of legislation, which is a pretty extraordinary response for some draft ledge. we crunched all those answers and all the responses, and in August of this year, we released our report on those survey responses, and then we changed the bill. We changed the bill and we picked up the feedback we got to make a better bill, which we then finally presented into Parliament in late August. And then in September, at the end of September, we got the numbers to refer it off to a Senate inquiry. I'm on that committee. It's the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. And having got it to the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, that committee has now put out a call for submissions on the bill. That call has gone out around the country. And this is now the third of 3 online workshops we've done to encourage people to put submissions in on this cannabis law reform. First was on 17th of October. Then we did a Reddit forum on the 27th of October. And this is our last online cannabis submissions workshop. Where are we going? This Friday, in fact, is the official close of submissions to the inquiry. And in December and the first quarter of next year, we expect a bunch of hearings around the country into the bill, with the aim for the committee to present a report to Parliament in May of this year.
Can you just go back to the slide? It's showing us like. Yeah, you're right. Can you skip to the next slide? There you go.
With that, so I hope that's showing through. Final report to the Parliament in May. Once the committee reports back to the Senate and says either it's a good bill or it's a bad bill or it's a good bill and it needs these amendments, we then bring it on to a vote in the middle of next year, and hopefully we've been able to persuade enough people to come across on board to support it. So that means a vote next year, in the middle of next year, on the bill about legalising cannabis, which is a pretty exciting prospect. How best can people in the community, support this process right now? Well, what we really need at the moment is a bunch of people writing submissions and putting those submissions into the parliamentary inquiry. So if you're thinking about doing that, what do you have to include? Well, the submissions need to directly address the bill, and they need to share thoughts about the good bits of the bill, and if you think so, some bad bits of the bill. If 100,000 people put a submission in and say, just legalise it, that's nice on one level, but they won't count as formal submissions to the inquiry. At a minimum, the submissions should say, I support the Legalising Cannabis Bill 2023 or words to that effect. But then a submission of about 1 or 2 pages addressing the bill and the provisions in the bill would be really helpful. It doesn't have to look fancy. It doesn't have to have letterhead. It can be in the form of an email. It can be in the form of a Google Doc. But it does need to, address the bill itself, and at a minimum say, I support the Legalising Cannabis Bill. Some things you might want to mention. You might want to talk about some of the specific aspects in the bill about why you support them. For example, the primary sales option we're looking at in the bill is via cannabis cafes and dispensaries. It's not going to be in the supermarket. It's not going to be at pubs. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do you think it could be improved? We're really excited about creating a bunch of new spaces away from alcohol and away from beer barns and the like, which can be pretty chilled out, relaxing places where people can purchase cannabis for takeaway and maybe also have cannabis cafes and a really chilled out culture. I had the benefit, actually, I was in Perth last weekend and going to a venue in suburban Perth, which is kind of ready to go in that way. Really relaxed environment, cafe environment, miles away from a sort of, an alcohol pub kind of place. And they are super keen to turn that place into a cannabis cafe. I felt like we had a little glimpse into the future, actually. You might want to talk about the fact that the bill proposes to allow up to 6 plants to be grown at home. Is that good? Is that bad? Should it be more? Should it be less? We don't put any restrictions on how those plants are grown, so they can be hydroponic or they could be, in a pot plants in the backyard. The only restriction we've put on it is that they can't be readily accessible by the public, which I think is a pretty sensible approach anyhow if you're growing cannabis. If you're having it in the front yard hanging over the footpath, you may have less cannabis at the end of your growing cycle than you'd initially intended anyhow. So is that right though? Some people said there should be more plants. Some people said it should be less. Should people be able to make edibles at home out of the cannabis they've bought? We say yes for personal use, but not for sale. Do you reckon that's right? And also, do you support having the requirement for venues to have a responsible service of alcohol licensing scheme where the staff are required to have up-to-date training to make this as safe and productive a market as possible? These are things you might want to cover in your submission because they're in the bill. Some other things to think about is we're proposing to create a whole new agency, the Cannabis Australia National Agency, or CANA, to manage licensing and sales. It's got a express public interest directive. It regulates the market in the public interest, not in the industry's interests, but in the public interest. Is that right? Do you think there's some other agency that might be able to do it? I personally don't think there is. I think if we're creating a recreational market, we wouldn't trust it, and it's not appropriate that it goes through any of the existing medical regulators. This is really a recreational market, and there's no obvious other body federally that can do it. But maybe you have different thoughts on that. Also, do you support the truth in labelling provisions in the bill? The bill proposes labelling for things like strength, strain, purity. These are things that CANA can require when products are for sale. Does that go far enough? Do you think that's important? Why is that important? You know, one of the things we got back in the submissions was people really want to know what they're putting in their body. They want this kind of information. They want it to be credible. They want it to be reliable. They don't feel like they have that same credibility and reliability with products they buy on the black market. Strangely enough, people think bikie gangs and organised crime are not great regulators, and they look forward to getting this kind of critical information, reliable information about the product they're putting in their body. The bill would not allow cannabis and alcohol or cannabis and tobacco products to be sold at the same venue in recognition of wanting to get away from those markets, those quite toxic markets. Do you think that's a good idea? Some people say, well, actually, why shouldn't pubs be able to sell cannabis? As I've said, we wanted to create a whole new market, a whole new space, but there may be different views on that. The principal penalty for possession is confiscation. If people are possessing above the amounts permitted in the bill. One thing we wanted to do was stop kids being criminalised in the space. So if anyone under 18 is found in possession of cannabis, it's not lawful for them to be in possession of cannabis. Police can confiscate the cannabis and have the power to confiscate the cannabis, but they can't charge the kids with a criminal offence. Of course, if an adult gives cannabis to a juvenile, to a young person, then that is quite a serious criminal offence under the bill. But we didn't want to see the police getting in there and arresting kids for having cannabis in their possession. Equally, we want to ensure that, you know, this is a market only for adults. There's good evidence that kids should not be consuming cannabis. So we make it an offence, the penalty of which is simply the confiscation of the cannabis by police. One of the other aspects in the bill is we propose to ban any alcohol, tobacco or pharmaceutical companies from having access to the industry. We think that's pretty important. Big pharma, big tobacco, the alcohol industries are they're exploitative and destructive in our mind. We don't want them to be anywhere near the cannabis market. And we see that as a way of actually creating a market that is much safer, much more democratic, and doesn't actually just give a growth target for some pretty offensive existing players in those industries. So do you support that ban? Do you think it's too restrictive? Will it put too many roadblocks in the way of the cannabis industry? Something you might want to engage in. One of the other things we put in the bill is we expressly say that the smoking of cannabis will be regulated by the existing tobacco controls on smoking. So if you can't smoke tobacco somewhere, you can't smoke cannabis somewhere. We got pretty strong support for that when we put it out for submissions. Some people have said there should be even more restrictions on cannabis smoking, including preventing people smoking it in a public place. We thought that was probably an invitation to some pretty aggressive over-policing, but people may have different views about that as well. I said at the beginning that one of the reasons we're so keen on pushing ahead with legalising cannabis is we see it as a measure of First Nations justice and a bit of historical justice here. And for that reason, the bill permits the regulator to issue free licenses to First Nations entities and First Nations controlled entities and First Nations people in recognition of that historical unfair impact of the war on drugs on their community. Is that right? Is that wrong? Does it not go far enough to address the historical injustices? These are things you might want to consider in your submissions. Other ideas you can have a look at. We've got the FAQ, frequently asked questions on our website. If you want to find where that is, you just Google legalizing cannabis greens, and it'll take you to that website. There'll be a link when we post this on our Facebook and Instagram pages as well. And you can also read the explanatory memorandum, which we tried to make. It's a document that sits with the bill. We've tried to make it as plain English as we can. So how do you put a submission in? Well, the first is you lodge it through the My Parliament portal, and there's a link to that in the on our Legalise It page on the Greens. You can also email it to, and you see the email address there. It's LegCon is Legal and Constitutional Committee, legcon.sen@aph.gov.au. Making a submission through the official Parliament portal is a little bit easier. Makes it easier on the staff at the other end, I'm told as well. But don't feel constrained. If that's a bit of a problem for you, just email it through. It'll have the it'll land in the same place eventually. Confidentiality. Look, if you don't want what you put in a submission shared on the wall, on the internet for everybody to access, say it. If you just don't want your name shared, that's okay. You can say, please put this, please redact my name and don't include my name, but the rest of my submission is fine. That's one way you can do it. If you think that might expose details of your personal life that people could, even if your name was not included, if you think that people might be able to identify, you can ask for the whole submission to be confidential. Obviously, the more public submissions we have, the better. But if, for example, in the course of your submission, you say that you are currently a regular cannabis user and you're currently getting it from the black market, well, you may not want everybody to know that. And I think probably the committee would are on side of excluding your name anyhow, so as to ensure that, we weren't unintentionally putting people to the attention of the police. So just include in your submission the extent to which you want that confidentiality included or not. We can talk about that a bit more in a bit. Talking about what we can talk about, we're up to the point for any questions. So let me just get back in amongst you all. Any questions? And we will share that submission guide as well, so you can take it away. If you failed to take notes as we went through, it'll all be there available.
I've got some questions.
Go, Mitchell.
With the access restrictions to existing big industries like the alcohol and pharmaceuticals, alternate around that, and a question relative to is how do we include these in the submission and what weight do they have? That's the follow-up. So for example, you've got a, what do you call it, like a patent, and they last 20 years. Could there be a time period of a significant amount that allows an industry to develop outside of those big markets before they can be near that space as an alternate?
Yeah. So it's not time limited. It's just a permanent ban.
Yeah.
Is what we're proposing for alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceuticals. We don't think we need them. We think there'll be enough energy, to develop a pretty robust market without them. So,
I think it would probably pollute the potential benefit of having a new industry by having those accessing them.
That's our view. And in fact, we've got other provisions in the bill that actually prevent for-profit corporations getting access to a license for cultivation, for example. And the reason we want to do that is we want to see a democratized market. We want to see individuals and cooperatives largely benefiting from this market rather than it being concentrated in a few corporate players. One of the other aspects of the bill is a proposed import ban as well, so that we create a market here in Australia. And you might want to say that you support an import ban in addition as well, because I mean, our industry insiders say without an import ban, if we legalise cannabis in Australia, we will just get flooded with Canadian content. There's warehouses full of Canadian content ready to go if we legalise it, and that would kill our market from day one.
So I've done a bit of looking into products that can be produced from cannabis plants, like hemp. So like paper, textiles, there's a bunch of different products. There's potential building industry materials, like example, a pine substitute. You could manufacture say a stud that you use for a wall frame. You could manufacture a substitute. Having a larger scale and having more waste, biomass waste from, say, not the flour that's used and processed, but from the stalk and stem. If you've got a large enough industry, you can get a lot more economic gain across the board.
Yeah, look, we are focusing on cannabis grown for recreational use, and they're probably different plants to the plants that will be the industrial hemp industry. There may be a small amount of crossover, but largely these plants, the value will be in the plants that produce some THC and CBD, and they tend to be different to the industrial hemp plants. I 100% agree with you.
I know what you're saying. I do agree. There is that fact. Yeah. I suppose the considerational point was that there are waste products that can be utilized in the market.
By all means,
and
would be that. I think it's an element.
Potentially,
I think it's a good element.
Yeah.
And I am on board 100%. I mean, if we want to stop chopping down trees for building products and paper, one really good way of doing that and saving our native forests, something I'm very passionate about, is creating the environment where industrial hemp, which I'm told grows like a weed, but industrial hemp for fibre is a pretty bloody good solution to that, isn't it? And legalising cannabis will remove some of those artificial barriers that exist for the hemp industry. Touching on that.
Well, if you get one, you can get the other going as well in parallel.
Right. Mitch, I might just go to Peter because Mr. had his hand up, and then if you've got more questions, we can come back.
Thanks. Yeah.
Hi. Actually, you've pretty much answered the question, which was how do you stop big canna becoming like big pharma and big alcohol? I think you did answer that pretty much with Mitch's question. Only other thing I was going to...
Well, Peter, before you go to the next question, I'll say there's another restriction in the bill that we popped in to try and make it a more decentralized democratic market. There are prohibitions on online sales. Bear with me just one second. Olivia, can I give you this? There are prohibitions on online sales. We're not allowing just a free-for-all advertising. We're permitting point-of-sale advertising at cafes and dispensaries, so you'll go in and it'll be kind of fun and colourful. But we are broadly prohibiting online advertising. And the only permissible online advertising will be through websites that are registered with Canna attached to a particular dispensary or attached to a particular cafe. And they will have geographical limits on where they can deliver to. So, for example, if you've got a cafe in Marrickville in Sydney, they could probably deliver to, the inner west and maybe the eastern suburbs in Sydney. But we'd want to have enough, they wouldn't be able just to deliver all across New South Wales or all across the country. If we had a cafe in Grafton, for example, on the north coast of New South Wales, they might be able to deliver to Grafton and all the surrounding regions as well, in order to give people in regional parts of the state reasonable access. But the idea being that we don't want just one or two big online sales warehouses, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne, and just obliterating and dominating the entire market. We really want to democratise this market and see the, particularly those regional communities, get the economic benefits and see some of the money and the profits stay in those areas.
How do I get my hand up?
Is that who was that? Mark? So I'm going to go Peter, Cassie, then Mark.
Just,
Right,
the other part of the question was, are you going to allow bottle shops to sell cannabis?
No.
Because I think you definitely
you can't sell alcohol and cannabis at the same premise.
This is not a sit-in venue, but to me that makes, I can understand not having in pubs, and if you're going to stay there and use on premises. Yep. But I think if you could, if one thing, bottle shops might lose a lot of business, so it would be good to get them on board. But also, I think if you've got a choice when you go to the bottle shop of alcohol and cannabis, you might see less alcohol consumption.
Yeah, but Peter, I'm happy to hear that submission put and throw it into the pot in the committee. I think by all means put it there. We formed the view that we wanted to separate the two industries, and we wanted to have a cannabis industry that was separated from the existing alcohol industry, which we think has some pretty dysfunctional elements at the current alcohol industry. And we wanted to set new ethical standards in the industry, responsible service of cannabis concepts, and create quite a different look and feel to the industry. But you're right. Will we get resistance from the alcohol industry? You betcha we'll get resistance from the alcohol industry. It's one of the reasons why it's hard to get Labor and the Coalition across, because they get all the money from the alcohol industry. Well, Cassie, if you've got more questions, Pete, we'll come back to you. Cassie? You got to unmute, Cassie.
Unmute.
Should we just press on the little red microphone in the corner? Let's see if I can do it. No, can't.
Has the microphone got a red line through it?
That's it.
Did that work? Hey, yep. Got it. So I've got sort of two questions, actually. One is in relation to, I can understand the whole principle about keeping the alcohol and the cannabis apart, but there is one setting where one would question it, as I can understand that one of the big new fields that will come about is a lot of culinary cannabis use. So there'll be restaurants and things like that that will want to create dishes that do have obviously cannabis in them in different formats. And I was just wondering, how would the alcohol, say, sit with something like that?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting point, Cassie, and I haven't turned our mind to that in particular. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have a submission process and why we do these kind of workshops is, every time you look at it, there's another little complexity. And what we've tried to do is get the balance right between creating a new industry with a bunch of protections around it, so we don't make the mistakes of the alcohol or the tobacco industry, or we don't make the mistakes we've seen in Canada and the United States with a free-for-all. So we've tried to learn from that and have a sort of public interest approach to it. We've also tried not to be the fun police, right? We actually think life should be kind of fun, and this should be like fun. And we want it to be creative, and we want people to get on and enjoy this part of their life. So I think it would be really appreciated if you've turned your mind to that, put a submission in and include that and say, look, if the venue is primarily a restaurant, if it's a restaurant venue, and the intent is to, have a sort of culinary inclusion of cannabis as part of their restaurant venue, then they may be permitted to also sell alcohol there. I'd be interested I can't quite work out how we draft that, get the balance right in that space, but I think it's a fair point. And as I said, we do not want to be the fun police, Cassie. So
Well, maybe the only option would be to say that they could have a BYO license with certain limitations, perhaps on that. That may, like, so back to the old days of the Chinese Western restaurants.
Yeah, but I mean, our principal position is this: we want to create a new space. We don't want to just have beer barns with cannabis, right?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all.
And so getting that right, but as I said, but also, there may be some really creative chefs out there who that might be one hell of a dessert. And do we really want to shut that down? That's a good point.
Well, it's another income revenue. It's another industry revenue. It's another employment option revenue. It's another purveyor's revenue. It's a revenue on so many levels. And then the other question I noticed that you didn't actually sort of mention in anywhere of it is the good old roadside drug testing and the overzealous employer drug testing.
Cool. Well, this is something that comes up repeatedly, and my party, the Australian Greens, 100% supports reforming our roadside drug testing laws so that they're based on impairment, not the mere presence, the smallest detectable presence of cannabis. That's not a road safety measure. That's a bizarre attack on war on drugs. So we're firmly of the view that whether a drug is legal or illegal does not matter. If you're impaired by that drug, you should not be behind the wheel of a vehicle. Full stop. But that is, the laws currently don't do that. They can, for example, allow people to be incredibly impaired by legal drugs like benzodiazepines and the like, and they get waved through. But some poor sod might have had a joint 3 days ago and has got a tiny residual amount of cannabis, and bang, loses their license. I mean, that's just nonsense. So we support reforming all those laws. The truth of the matter is, though, we had a look if we could do it in this bill, and we can't, because we haven't got a constitutional head of power that would allow us to extend it at a federal level. Once we legalise cannabis, that's going to have to be done state by state and territory by territory. But we think once we create a legal market, that will be a much, much easier battle in state and territory parliaments. And we're 100% on board doing that. Sorry, your second part of that question?
And the question was about the overzealous employer drug testing, which...
Well, we say the same.
It's such a far cry from its initial intended purpose now that, every man and his dog, even if he's a pamphlet walker, needs to be drug tested effectively. It was only ever designed for really 3 levels, as I understand it, which was first and foremost integrity sensitive. So therefore, a person in any position generally of higher than anyone else in the community. So things like police officers, politicians, lawmakers, judges, etc., etc. So they are the most integrity sensitive. Then you had your safety criticals, which were obviously people like that had public transport. Oh no, I would say that they're in another level. So then you have safety critical, which are like your public transport driver operators, pilots, surgeons, sort of pretty much something that could directly 100% kill another person. And then you've got your high risk categories, which are your mining, your heavy vehicles, your so on and so forth. But now, like I said, every man and his dog's getting tested, and for the most ridiculous of jobs. And I've got to be honest, I think when you look at the testing levels of the other drugs, the harder drugs that are also involved in the testing levels for them in comparison to the other, in relation to the cutoff levels for THC. THC is so low, but the other ones are actually so high. But the fact is that those harder, more dangerous, more addictive drugs, more influential drugs can be cleared out of the system a lot quicker.
Can I answer the question, Cassie?
Yep. Sorry.
So a lot of employers currently rely upon the illegality of cannabis to be a reason to test for it, and to test for it at a level that's unrelated to impairment.
Exactly.
They say, well, if you're breaking the law, you're a bad egg. We don't want you here. We have a legitimate reason to test you if you're breaking the law, and tough luck. I think that's actually challengeable, even under current laws. I think that where it's totally unrelated to the employment, I think that is challengeable under current laws. Maybe not if you're a cop, but otherwise challengeable. But once we legalise it, that argument is entirely removed. And employers who insist upon a zero tolerance approach to cannabis will find themselves in a lot of legal hot water and industrial hot water if they continue in doing that kind of base of drug testing. And I think the bill itself doesn't overturn it, but the bill would fundamentally change the dynamics in workplaces and change the dynamics in legal challenges to those kinds of, if anyone got sacked for it, I think the employer would find themselves in a lot of hot water. Of course, I want to be clear again. If you are a surgeon or you are, driving heavy machinery, or you're a truck driver, or you're a train driver, drug testing that tests for impairment of legal or illegal drugs is quite legitimate.
Exactly.
I'm sure that you're not, impaired. But drug testing that is working out whether or not you had a joint on Friday night when you're going to work on Monday, that is not legitimate. It's not legitimate now, and it won't be legitimate in the future. And in fact, you've probably heard the same disturbing anecdotal reports that we've heard, that in industries like fly-in, fly-out industries, in mining and oil and gas industries and others, that actually there's a bunch of people moving from cannabis to ice because ice washes through your system in 24 hours. It's not detectable when you go to work. Who on earth would design a system that is encouraging people to switch from cannabis to ice? Well, it turns out the current illegal system. So, yes, I think that's hopefully a significant change. I'm just going to go to Mark now. Mark?
Yep. Yes, David. I might be out of line a bit, but I think you're over complicating a fairly simple idea. All the constraints you've mentioned about cannabis already apply to alcohol and apply to tobacco. And what I would suggest is that you have some overarching legislation that covers cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco, with separate side bits for each particular substance, and so you don't have kids in it. You can't sell it to under 18s. It's got to be sold from licensed premises. Production of it has to be licensed all the way up the line. Same as alcohol, same as everything. And so the overarching legislation to put further constraints on alcohol would then exist, and we'd go from there.
Look, that's an interesting, and we did look at whether or not we could just slip it into any existing regulatory regime. The fact is you can't federally, because there is no federal regulating regime for alcohol and tobacco. It's pretty much all done by the states. And most people would say it's done pretty badly by the states, and historically has been done pretty badly with some pretty toxic industries. So that was our rationale. First of all, there is no existing mechanism federally. No existing regulator that we can just identify. So we did have to create a new federal regulator.
So that'd be a state thing. It could be.
Yeah,
I mean, done in the state.
If a state parliament wanted to say all the restrictions that are currently applied for tobacco will apply to cannabis and just roll out legal cannabis that way, they could. Most people would say that wouldn't work, though, because the extremely high tax rates that apply on tobacco would actually make recreational cannabis vastly more expensive than the current black market cannabis, and nobody would buy it. That's one of the problems.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of chop tobacco around too for that very reason.
Well, there is, but that's not a very, we wouldn't want to import that dysfunction into the recreational cannabis market, I think.
Yeah.
But I see your point, Mark. Look, Occam's razor approach on this, simple is this. We've tried to make it as straight up and down a system as we possibly can, but we have had to create a whole new federal regulatory model, and we've tried to not over criminalize it, tried to simplify it, have home grow without a license, do all of that. but we did need to create a new federal regulator.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Now, if your federal law goes through, and you get some arsehole state saying, no, we don't want to do this, can they sort of stay out of it, or would they be forced to make cannabis legal in their state?
Well, no. So the way the Constitution works is once the federal Parliament passes a law, and they've got the power to pass a law, then any state or territory law that's contrary to it, that comes into conflict with it, basically gets read down, ceases to be of effect. So if we pass a federal law making it legal to grow, to manufacture, to distribute, to sell, and to consume and possess cannabis, then any state law that currently makes it a crime, basically, it'll still be there, but it will have no effect. So it's basically a way of doing national drug law reform without having to go through 6 states and 2 territories.
Now I'm a Barossa boy, and I think the wine industry would make a good model. It would make a good model for cannabis growers. So lots of small growers, they're under big corporations, but the growers themselves are independent to a degree. They get some finance from the top, and that would be a good way of doing it.
Well, if you want to know, Mark, when we discussed this in the office and we talked with stakeholders and people as we were drafting the bill, a number of people said that. They said, Blake, actually, the wine industry is a pretty good example of, quite a lot of small growers, family-owned businesses scattered across the country, cellar-door sales and stuff, that kind of democratized market, if you like, not controlled by 1 or 2 big corporations. And we have consciously tried to sort of create a market that makes that more rather than less likely to be the model.
Because the wine industry works really well, even though I've given it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think.
Right. Thanks for that. Yeah, go on.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the contribution. And whack it in a submission.
Look, I will. My preferred stance on drugs is that all recreational drugs, from ice down to aspirin, basically, or not aspirin, but down to tobacco, should be made legally available to those who have licenses to use and consume it.
Well, that would be a substantial expansion of our current bill. But the good news is the ACT, where there's a Labor Greens co-government, have just decriminalised personal possession of drugs. Those laws came into effect on Saturday. As a national first, it's really made the coalition very cranky, which is normally a pretty good thing.
But what have they done? What have they done about
cannabis? That plays out, we're going to see that as a model.
But didn't they legalise cannabis?
No, they decriminalised cannabis as well. So there's
no
legal market for cannabis. You don't go to jail for being in possession of cannabis.
Oh, right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like it is in South Australia. It's been like that since God knows when.
Kind of was, and then kind of wasn't. South Australia's flip-flopped over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I know. Since
Mark, I just see. I am going to go to Peter and then Mitchell, and then if you've got more questions, happy to come back.
Okay, I'll hang on.
No worries, Mark. Peter.
All right. Just a thought on the banning of importing and exporting of cannabis. How does that sit with free trade laws?
Well, we don't have an export ban, but we do have an import ban. And I think we don't see a problem with it. But there are fair free trade agreements that we have with some of these countries. Most of these countries also have restrictions on the import and export of cannabis, and particularly the import of cannabis. So normally a country can only make a valid challenge if they themselves don't have a restriction. So, if that's the problem we have, Peter, that we're fighting Canada in the World Trade Organization about our import ban, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That's a good problem to have.
Good. Thank you.
Mitchell?
Yeah. With the bans, I haven't seen the legislation. I've got to read it. Conscious about so you want small businesses to be able to uptake the market that's going to become available. Example previously made is a winery. So you've got, say, a small grower on, you know, like if you know the Mornington Peninsula, or maybe there's somewhere local to where you are that is like a boutique market for wines or some other industry. So with the regulations, do they support with the growth of the product? Because if a business has to go, or it's inaccessible because of too much legislation, then a small business won't be able to launch. Example is being able to provide the product they're trying to sell. So if you're not able to import it, how do you generate the market, or what is in place to see the market generated and kick off? Example, the Canberra legislation hasn't been able to address getting access to supply of seeds just yet, or very well, or through legal means.
Yeah. Good questions, Mitchell. How do you get the market started with a big import ban? You can get a license to import seed, and it's one of the categories of license that we've proposed. So that's one way. The Canberra model, the ACT model, doesn't allow any legal cannabis market. It's a decriminalised model, so it's still illegal to grow cannabis. Ours is fundamentally different. Ours is a legal model where it will be legal to get to grow cannabis, provided you get a license. And we are creating this new national authority that will issue the license. We don't expect the licenses to be overly expensive. But we do expect the regulator to actively police the license to ensure conditions are being maintained. So there will be a fee for license, which won't be free. It'll be probably $1,000 or so to get a license, maybe bigger if bigger enterprise, but not of a scale that would be a real barrier to small business getting in the market.
Yeah, because I based on what you've said so far, the aim is to get small business generating.
Correct.
More than any other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, like, because, we could put more and more regulations and provisions in to create a more and more perfect market, on one view. But if that puts in so many hurdles that small business can't operate and people can't run a business, well, it's pretty self-defeating at the end of the day. So we want to allow for a bit of experimentation, a bit of creativity. We want to allow for economic activity to start in regional communities in particular. And so we've consciously not tried to over-regulate it. But have we got the balance right? I don't know. Read the bill and have a view, and maybe you think we're being, too much of the fun police. Maybe tell us. We've tried to get that balance right. It's been a conscious tension in the drafting.
I suppose following up on that, then, what is the course of action if something is not working in the bill that gets through? I suppose not to write it so that it can't be changed readily.
Yeah, good point. So a bunch of this stuff, the labelling requirements, the licensing conditions, and all of that, we haven't articulated them in detail in the bill. We've given the regulator the power to issue those and to change them. We've also required the regulator to report at least once a year on the state of the market, a bunch of stats and figures about the state of the market, and to proactively monitor the market to see if it requires amendment or change. We want a lively, engaged regulator in the space, not the dead hand of government in the space.
Would that be example for those statistics, like the Australian Bureau of Statistics collecting that information?
No, the regulator is going to collect the information, similar to what happens in Canada. There's national data collected once a year in Canada, which has been really, really useful for Canadian regulators to understand the nature of the market.
Yeah. The reason I mentioned the Australian Bureau of Statistics is because I've had small businesses and I've had to do multiple surveys answering to the Australian Business Bureau because of relative information from the business that I run, and it's fairly effective.
Well, my guess is that when we get this up, the CANA, the national authority, will require reporting to the licenses, probably on a quarterly basis. It'll be a bit like a sort of cannabis BAS. Would be my guess.
Yeah.
Peter.
Thanks.
Again, question here was on quality.
Question. Oh no.
Yeah, Peter, do you mind we go to Ben first? We haven't heard from Ben. Ben.
Hi, David. How are you, mate?
Good. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, mate, great to see you. Yeah, I just want to wish you all the greatest in trying to, get votes from the senators and stuff, because it's time. It's because I think it's because of the times. It's 2023,
Yeah.
should have been done maybe a while ago, But, if we get votes from the senators, we can get something done now, can't we?
We sure can. So the way I would encourage you to help us along on that, submissions close this Friday.
Yeah.
I think we've got a link. See in the chat. If you want to grab that link now, you can grab a link to
okay.
where you can find more information on the submission.
Okay.
Share it with all your friends. Harass them between now and Friday. All your social circles, your Facebook, pump it out and say.
How are we going for votes in the House of Representatives and stuff?
Well, one thing at a time, Ben. Well,
I understand, mate. Yeah, I understand. I understand, but I thought it's hard. No, I'm just saying, it's hard to get votes, is it? I don't know how it works.
It is. I'm not going to pretend.
I don't know how it works.
Yeah. Well, why don't I'll give you a 2-second summary. When we launched this bill in the campaign in September of last year, part of our strategy, our media strategy, was we would launch the bill with a bunch of positive stories. We did that.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
then we thought we would wait for the coalition in particular to attack us.
Then
respond to them as being a bunch of out of date 1950 deadheads.
Yeah.
Right? That was our week one media strategy.
Yeah.
So we launched the bill, we pump it out, we got some good media.
Yeah.
And then the coalition said nothing.
Okay.
They hid under their desk.
Yeah.
And the reason they hid under their desk is a whole bunch of their supporters want this to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so that for us was a good sign. I mean, a bit frustrating. You can't.
Yeah. Okay, that's great then. That's optimistic. That's optimistic, isn't it?
Labor initially came out and said they had no current plans to legalise cannabis.
Yeah, right.
Current plans.
Right.
They've said that they oppose this bill before it works its way through the Senate.
Yes.
How they did that, I don't know.
Anybody. That's hard, yeah.
So their position is no current plans to legalise cannabis. Our job between now and the middle of next year is to get rid of that. No current plan and force the buggers to do it. And if they don't, don't vote with us next year, in the middle of next year, we will be coming right up to the next federal election campaign, and we will make this a core campaign, right?
Best of luck, mate. Best of luck, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's I understand it's cooperation, isn't it? If the people don't cooperate, it's hard to get the bill passed.
Yeah, and look, we need the community to get on board and support this. So many submissions as possible.
As much help as you can get. As much help as you can get.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Ben.
All right, mate. Thank you.
Peter, take us out. Last question.
Who's going to handle quality control?
The Cannabis Australia National Authority. They're expressly empowered and required to put in place quality standards. They can put in place, and this is something you might want to engage with, they can put in place limits on strength. We haven't said if there should be, we haven't said what they should be, but they can also put in place some limits on strength. We see a bunch of genetic engineering happening at the moment. There may be cannabis strains with strengths that would be quite seriously dangerous. And we think looking forward, there should be the capacity, if necessary, to put limits on strength. But the regulator responsible for the growing conditions, for the quality control, and for the labelling, and will be the Cannabis Australia National Authority.
The reason I'm asking is I've got one of my neighbours gets medicinal cannabis. The stuff they prescribed wasn't available, so they ended up with a generic from the pharmacy with their own pharmacy label, and it's been giving them headaches, which is often due to overfeeding or over-fertilizing and not flushing. So, chemical contamination of chemicals.
Well, one of the things we've heard repeatedly is that a lot of the crop that's being grown at the moment is full of all those growth accelerants that they're being harvested before those have been flushed out of the system of the plant. That's creating a bunch of unnecessarily, toxic elements in the product that people are consuming. and we would expect the canner. We've given it the power to do testing of products. We've given it the power to, you know, to get in there and be an active regulator. And so if people are found to be putting product to market while it's still got those accelerants in it, or any other toxicity in it, the Cannabis Australia National Authority has the power to test it. And if found, they can cancel licenses. Peter.
Great, thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for the engagement. I really enjoyed this. It was a small group of us, but I thought we had a really engaged chat, and I appreciated all of your input. As I said, share it amongst your networks. Share it, you know, as best you can between now and Friday. As many submissions as possible, and let's get this done.
That's the way.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Bye.
Beautiful.
Thank you for everything. Will you email us links and things?
We will. Did you grab it from the chat, Cassie? Did you?
No, I didn't. So I was just wondering, are you just going to pop out an email with those links, or?
We will. Everyone who's registered will definitely send it through with the links too, Cassie.
That lovely. And is that little like PowerPoint thing on your website as well? That little discussion.
It is.
Oh,
it's up on the website, and we'll send you a link to that in the email too, Cassie.
Thank you ever so much, David. It's been wonderful.
Pleasure. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Okay. Now I don't know how to operate this thing.
Join the club.
Hit the leave button down the bottom right hand corner.
I don't have it.
Oh, maybe I've got an Apple computer. You should have a red button that says leave.
No, I'm on an Android phone.
Oh, good luck then.
Thank you.
There'll be a leave button.
I've forgotten how to get it.
Here we go. Is that it?
Leave.
No, that didn't work either. Ah, there it is. Leave. But why didn't that come up earlier, you stupid thing?